and left. This is Unadi.
Page up.
Then,
Up. But ఎందుకు this is very sticky.
they put it in some wrap.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Acha acha.
Bag lo undu sir. Good afternoon, dear students. Yeah. So today we have one lecture by Dr. Uma Rao. She is head of the division nematology department of IARI. Ma'am did her BSc Agriculture and MSc from UAS Bangalore, and she did her PhD from IARI, and postdoctoral experience she has got, and she did work in abroad laboratories, particularly Leeds University and also at
North Carolina State
North
University.
Carolina State University and Rothamsted station also she did work, and above this she had got many awards, and to her recognition lot of international collaborations ma'am was having, and currently she is further working on international collaborations also. And regarding number of publications, many number of publications, and for your kind information, she is one of the few bioinformatics, having interest in bioinformatics, and she started working in bioinformatics long before than we have started at IRI. So she worked a lot in nematodes and pest management, and also relevant to bioinformatics. So with this brief introduction, I would like to request Dr. Rao ma'am to kindly just take lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Ramakrishna.
Thank you.
Forget about whatever he said. Okay. More than bioinformatics, my interest was how we can make use of the genome data or for the benefit of crop protection. Okay. This is the direction in which we are making use of the genomics data which we have generated, plus what is available in the public domain. Okay. Coming to my talk, genomic approaches for pest and nematode management. Since I think most of you are students from biological sciences, or so this makes sense. This is just for you to appreciate the losses caused by nematodes and the various qualitative and quantitative kind of losses. See, unlike fungus or bacteria or insects, most economically important nematodes, they are soil-borne, they are below ground. Therefore, it tends to get neglected. And when the problem becomes so severe, people start thinking, oh, it could be because of nematodes. So if you see this is wheat infected by one of the foliar nematodes, where the entire endosperm is converted to the nematode wool. It's called nematode wool. Each grain can have up to 100,000 nematodes. You can well imagine their capacity to multiply. These are potatoes which are infected by nematodes, hugely reduces the quality as well as the size of the tubers. Similar the case in case of grapes as well, huge reduction in the bunch size. So the farmer can experience even up to 100% yield losses and economic returns. In case of garlic as well, and this is in case of carrots. Not only the reduction in the size as per the numbers, in case of carrots, there is a huge distortion which will affect the quality of the carrot tubers, and vis-a-vis the the preference of the consumers for such poor quality tubers will be very less. In addition to this, presently we are having some emerging problems, particularly in case of protected cultivation. Government of India provides up to 60% subsidy to the farmers, particularly the small and medium marginal farmers whose land holdings are very small. And by having poly houses, they can take crops continuously, and the returns are quite attractive. So here, they grow mostly high value vegetables like cucumbers, the salad green cucumbers, and then the capsicums, red, green, yellow capsicums, which fetch high premium in the markets. And this is also possible for them to have a crop after the crop. Then secondly, the ornamentals like zarberas, then gladiolus, they all are grown in these net houses or poly houses. And the way they are grown, you can see most of these crops grown in poly houses, they are given irrigation through drips. So this provides drip irrigation and continuous availability of the roots, the host, makes it a heavenly kind of an atmosphere for the worms to continuously survive on these plants, and leading to heavy population buildup. Okay? In addition to that, we have a huge problem in guava and pomegranate orchards. Even well-established orchards, they die because of nematodes. Along with, they create room for disease complexes, along with fungi and bacteria. Even well-established, as old as 5 to 7 year old trees, they just die within days. So once there is heavy population buildup, the plants become weak and they die. You can see this is normal root and then heavily galled roots. Now, why such a thing is happening? These nematodes, they have a syringe-like structure which inoculate, or during the process of infection, they inject lot of secretions. They have to overcome the barrier of plant cell wall, both enzymatically as well as mechanically. And these nematode secretions, they are responsible for various functions. They modify the plant cell walls, they suppress the host defenses, then they also behave like regulators of plant hormones, because some of these worms, particularly the endoparasitic and semi-endoparasitic worms, if they have to feed on the plants, they have to modify the plant cells into nematode feeding cells, and only through these modified cells they can take the nutrients. You should appreciate one thing, that plant parasitic nematodes, they are obligate, they cannot be cultured. Therefore, it is extremely difficult to manipulate them. They also, these secretions are responsible for remodeling of signal transduction pathways, and they behave like transcription factors, and they act like mimics of plant molecules. There are various ways of managing these nematodes, starting from synthetic chemical molecules, cultural practices, where we can use crop rotation, so that early, for instance, in North India, for managing one of the nematode problems, we recommend early sowing, so that by the time the worms come out, they prefer low temperature conditions, the plant will escape the nematode infection. Then physical, very convenient to use in case of banana rhizomes. The rhizomes are given hot water treatment, so that whatever nematodes are there inside, they get killed. Then host resistance, being biotechnologists mostly, you know, host resistance is one of the ways in entire crop protection to manage various pests and diseases. Then biologicals, various fungal biocontrol, fungal bacterial biocontrol agents can be used for the management. Then integration, more than one approach of management can be integrated as per the convenience, and then use it. But it is, all these approaches, they are inadequate. Therefore, the genomic tools, the molecular data, can be highly useful, particularly in case of nematodes, by way of, they provide the targets for RNA interference. How many of you know about RNAi? Okay, good. Now, these are the limitations I have already told you. Biological agents and biobotanicals, reproducibility problems are there. resistance. We don't have resistance in all the crops. The widely used resistance has been in case of tomato. We have quite a few MI genes which have been exploited for commercial uh, management and varieties. Crop rotation and cultural practices, again not suitable under all conditions and for all nematodes. Pesticides, most of the pesticides have been withdrawn. Whatever were used like Aldicarb, Carbofuron, Carbofuron is going to be phased out by next year. Therefore, we don't have many nematicides. Genomics, it provides, the genome information provides a lot of genomic data for comparative genomics for annotation, identification of vital genes that could be potential targets for designing transgenics, and then we can also design molecules targeting these vital functions like hatching, host finding mechanism, infection, development and reproduction. So this particular one, you can use similar targets, whether it is insects, fungus, bacteria. So you have to identify the vital gene targets, particularly being biotechnologists. Otherwise, if you just target, if we are targeting host genes, it is really difficult not to have unintended or off-target effects, because most of the genes, if we target the nematode genes, they will be housekeeping genes. So it is difficult to avoid unwanted effects. The worm revolutionizing the genomics started with Sidney Brenner's work in C. elegans, which fetched him a Nobel Prize, followed by Fire and Mello, who invented RNA gene silencing. So these two discoveries, they revolutionized the genomics, particularly in case of worms. The current status of nematode genomics is we have 134 nematode genomes that are sequenced and annotated. It covers important animal parasitic, plant parasitic and free living nematodes. And the whole issue of nematode genomics started with C. elegans. You know, that was the first eukaryote to be sequenced during the human genome program. Okay, so that had a huge advantage for us, the parasitologists. There is a project called 959 nematode genomics, which is ongoing. 959 name number is given because C. elegans has 959 nuclei. So they targeted to sequence 959 genomes under different categories. These are some of the well-known databases dedicated for worm genomics. We have nematodes.org, wormbase parasite, and then some of the leading genomics who are doing parasite genomics is Washington State University, St. Louis, at Missouri, US, and Caltech. Then University of Edinburgh, there's a huge, now the person who was at Edinburgh, Mark Blackster, not only the nematodes, trematodes, flatworms, everything that they were sequencing, he has moved to Sanger's. And these are the two in case of UK. And INRA in France is another center sequencing nematode genomes. So Washington State University at St. Louis is the first center which sequenced a nematode, plant parasitic nematode transcriptome, for which I made the library. Okay? And that paper came out in genome biology. And today the impact factor of genome biology is, I think, 16. So what are the features of the nematode genomes? One is these genomes are similar in size to those of flatworms, annelids and insects, something like between 60 to 100 megabase upwards, but are smaller than others, some of the other invertebrates such as mollusks and echinoderms. Then these genomes are compact and they range somewhere between 90 to 701 megabase in size, only 1.7 to 4.2% of the size of the human genome. But number of genes, if you see in the nematodes, it's comparable to that of humans. Though they are such small ones, but the number of genes are many more. This is just to have a glance at the different plant parasitic nematodes. that have been sequenced, and more than 30 plant parasitic nematode genome sequencing projects are right now going on. And in this, the last genome, Millardigine graminicola, this is one of the major nematode problems in rice, particularly in upland rice. The moment you reduce water, you will see nothing but the entire root system galled, and it hugely can interfere with the plant growth, and there are cases where there are no grains reaped at all. So that is the severity of this nematode problem in case of rice. We have sequenced one more species, it's a cyst nematode, which infects wheat. I have not shown here. For this, we have used both Illumina. We have published the draft genome of Graminicola, but recently we have done a huge improvement with the draft genome by generating a PacBio sequence. Now, what these parasitic nematode genomes, they tell us. One is, they tell us a lot about horizontal gene transfer. The second nematode, that is Millardigine hapla, that was sequenced, showed that there are rhizobium, like bradyrhizobium, like genes in case of this nematode. Then, because they live in soil, so due to that, there is a lot of horizontal gene transfer, lot of cellulases which are present in bacteria, they are present. In case of nematodes also, pectinases, xylanases, they are all present in nematode genomes. Then gene family expansions, how this is taking place. The evolution of new genes that mediate interactions with the host. If they have to have a compatible interaction, see any irritation to the plant will react by way of host defenses. In spite of it, it's very interesting to know that all the pathogens and insects, how they overcome these host defenses. So recently, it is unpublished, I'm not going to reveal it. One of the nematode genes, it is so beautifully interacting with the host genes, particularly it is like a master switch. They are interacting with TOR signaling. And TOR signaling is the major, it has such wide functionality. So some of the fungi are known to be interacting with the TOR signaling. And this is the first time where we have found something which is interacting with TOR signaling. Then parasitism specific gene regulation. What makes a parasite a parasite? C. elegans is there. Initially when C. elegans was sequenced, everybody thought that, oh, it's going to be a huge revolution for the parasites, but then they couldn't make use of it because C. elegans can be cultured, whereas all parasites, they cannot be cultured. So that's what we need to see, what makes them obligate. So these are the kind of pieces of information which will be helpful to work with the parasites. Then endoparasitic nematodes, they evoke reduced immune response in plants and mimic plant proteins to alter plant signaling. So in case of these worms, the genes are gained and lost frequently. So what is RNAi? It is RNA interference or post-transcriptional gene silencing, popularly called PTGS. It's a conserved biological response to double-stranded RNA that mediates resistance to both endogenous parasitic and exogenous pathogenic nucleic acids and regulates the expression of protein coding genes of gene expression. This is the pathway, you all know. This is, I have given just an outline, what is important for the parasites. You have double-stranded RNA. It could be endogenous, which can be produced by way of transgenics or by way of synthesizing double-stranded RNA through in vitro transcription and introduced into the worms. When double-stranded RNA goes inside the worms, immediately dicer comes into action. It chops off into the small interfering RNAs, which makes a complex with RAC and rest of the steps. And RAC will guide the siRNAs to the target messenger RNA, where the single-stranded RNAs, they hybridize with the complementary sequences and leads to RNA degradation, by which there is no translation at all. So this is how the gene silencing is happening. In case of delivery, the double stranded delivery methods in case of nematodes, we have two methods, either using in vitro method, that is in case of C. elegans, where we can do injection using a micromanipulator, or feeding through E. coli expressing the target genes, or by way of soaking also. I don't know how many of you know about it. Genome-wide RNA phenotype is available for C. elegans. Because of these options of introducing double-stranded RNA, and the fate of every nucleus could be traced due to the very short life cycle of 3 days under the microscope. What is happening to the first nucleus, what is happening to the second. So like that, all the fate of 959 nuclei could be traced. So that is the strength of C. elegans, and as on today, it is one of the best animal models for drug discovery. And then in case of plant parasitic nematodes, we have the option of in vitro RNA through soaking in double-stranded RNA, and through transgenic approach, that is in planter, delivery of target dsRNA through plants, and transgenic approach. I'm only talking about the application part, okay? So this is, these are the different genes that have been targeted. You can see major sperm proteins, cysteine proteases, C-type lectins, endoglucanases, pectate lyases. These are FMRF amide-like peptides. So like that, in different nematodes, like cyst nematodes, potato cyst nematode, soybean cyst nematodes, and then root knot nematodes. So each one of them have given a particular phenotype. Examples of host-delivered RNAi, you can say integrase and splicing factor. For incognita, in case of tobacco, after the first report, there is no continuation of this work. This was done by an Indian in, I think, IIT Kanpur. Then secreted peptide 16D10, based on this one piece of work, this discovery led to filing a patent for 37 genes, a US patent. Okay? Then major sperm protein, in case of soybean cyst nematodes in soybean, like that, so many are there. What we are doing in our lab, when we started working with RNAi, it was very important to confirm a functional RNAi in the target nematode species which we are working, that is Millardigine incognita. So in C. elegans, there are 77 effector proteins, whereas in this nematode, there are 27. Based on in silico analysis, they had published that the 27 are there. We did a wet lab validation. One of the PhD theses in my lab was on validating all these genes. In fact, we found quite a few differences, and we have published it as well. For choosing the gene targets, all of you, since most of you are from the practicing side, like you are clinicians, it is very important, irrespective of the system you are working with, you should know what kind of genes to be targeted. So you should have a good understanding if it is biotic stress, or if it is abiotic stress as well, a good understanding of the different critical stages of the pathogen. So in this case, we try to kind of develop information as to what are the critical stages. So it is nematode hatching, then infection process, feeding and establishment, and reproduction. You interfere at any one of these stages, you can achieve some level of results. So for this, we try to see the gland secretions. This is the first step in the process of nematode infection. Unless these secretions are given out, the worms cannot overcome the cell wall barrier. And these, there are two sets of esophageal glands, two different types. One is dorsal glands, another one is subventral glands. Subventral gland secretions are useful during the pre-parasitic stage and early parasitic stage, whereas the dorsal gland secretions are post-parasitic stages. Therefore, we took these 7 genes involving both the dorsal and subventral glands. This is how the worm, this is the pump. It keeps pumping these secretions through the stylet. It will go out into the plant system. This is the stylet. Then the second set of genes is the neurosensory genes. Though nematodes are categorized as pathogens, they are animals just like insects. So being animals, they have to have a very good neurosensory system. Therefore, we targeted these neuropeptides, 6 of the neuropeptides which are involved in various functions. See how the nematode is moving its head. It is trying to sense. Therefore, this is the nematode head. So this is the strategy we used for evaluation based on RNAi gene silencing for different sets of genes. So we cloned those genes based on in silico analysis and then prepared the double-stranded RNA by synthesizing 2 single-stranded RNAs and hybridizing that, then used for feeding the worm. So this is an FITC fluorescent dye used along with the double-stranded RNA, and also the double-stranded RNA was synthesized using one of the labeled nucleotides. And to confirm this was useful that it has gone inside the worm, then we have done the phenotyping by 2 ways. After soaking, we have seen there is a gel in the Petri plates called pluronic gel. It is completely transparent. This helps us for a lot of behavioral studies, and we have also set up infection on the live roots which are grown in a soilless medium, and different disease parameters were used for scoring the disease burden to determine the short-term and the long-term effects of gene silencing. Then if we have found some utility of these silencing of these genes, then we have taken ahead for making the gene constructs for transgenic approach, because all genes may not give some phenotype. And one more thing is nematodes do not have systemic RNAi. It is transient. Therefore, one-time silencing, if it can have a long-term effect of lasting up to say 25 to 30 days, that means it's going to be very effective. So initially we used tobacco for the host-delivered RNAi, but then our target host was brinjal. So in brinjal, we did the development of transgenics through leaf explants. Once the transgenics were developed, they were subjected to various molecular analysis using the PCR by confirming the presence of both sense and antisense, and also the selectable marker. Then the southern analysis for gene integration and copy number, and qPCRs for expression. Northerns were also done to confirm the siRNA and dsRNA generation. The plants were grown in controlled conditions in transgenic greenhouses. Fruits were harvested, each single fruit was labeled, seeds were collected, and these are the number of events for different genes available with us. We have more than 300 events. This is one example, the different stages where we targeted 2 FMRF amide-like peptides, FLIPs 14 and 18 in tobacco. It is very important the gene which we work with, at what stages of the nematode life cycle it is useful. So we did initially in 3 stages, that is the pre-parasitic J2s, females, and then eggs. So you can see the importance of both the target genes in the pre-parasitic J2s and also the egg stage, because by this time the J2s are formed within the egg, therefore the expression levels are more. Then when we did the soaking of each of the genes, like 14 and 18, what is its effect in the worms? 14 silencing didn't have any effect on 18, and 18 silencing didn't have any effect on 14. And unrelated negative controls are equally important. If you are publishing a paper, without that, it is not convincing. Therefore, we took GFP as an unrelated control, and buffer soaked worms were also used, another negative control. the southern blots, and then the qPCR data. Here, dsRNA confirmation in northern. This is our positive control. These are the transgenic plants, events. And then saRNA. It is quite difficult, I'm telling you, to get these blots and the cold gel. The phenotyping, we have taken each of the plant root, and then these are controls and these are transgenics, and the disease burden in terms of nematode infection, in terms of galls, egg masses, then females, eggs per egg mass. Everything was counted under the microscope. Then we derived the multiplication factor, that is final population over initial population. How many times it has multiplied? Remember, this is only in a span of 30 days. Okay? For both the genes, there was almost up to 75% reduction in the multiplication factor. We don't aim at 100%. It is impossible. So far, in agriculture, the only transgenics which have given 100% control based on RNA gene silencing is in case of bean, that is developed by the Brazilians against a bean mosaic virus. So 100% reduction. Otherwise, you can never get, because this is only knockdown, not knockout. We also had to confirm that whatever reduction we are finding is because of post-delivered RNA of our target genes. So what we did was, we collected the females from the roots and we did qPCR for the two target genes, and we found down regulation. Here again, there was no unintended effect on the other gene. It was a specific gene silencing. So in fact, we had to do this as a query from the reviewers. How do you say that this specificity happens? The expression levels in we advanced them to T3, T4 generations, and the performance as well as the expression levels were quite stable. We did an event characterization. Where exactly, for the single gene copy insertions, where is the site of integration? So we have characterized the flanks, and we have developed sequence-specific event-specific PCR primers. So you know the mess up that has happened with BT cotton. So such things should never happen when you are working with transgenics. If you want to claim that it is my event, you should have event-specific PCR markers, and from time to time you should do it. One of the reasons why that was a mess up is mostly they depended on the ELISA, and ELISA can't be 100%. So if at every step, if they had characterized their event and used the species, the event-specific primers, probably we wouldn't have got into such an embarrassing situation. So therefore, anybody who is working on transgenic approach, you should know it is your event, not somebody else's event. So this is targeting two genes. One is the dorsal gland specific gene, the other one is the ventral gland specific gene. By this time, we were more mature and we had more time as well. So we did the expression analysis across all the stages, which were dissected from the plant roots. Then you can see the expression. Some of them are not at all in the early parasitic. Late parasitic stages only we find. Similarly, here also. I want to ask you one question, because I'm finding that probably it's becoming a little more monotonous. You want to have it as a sort of an interactive session? So you can ask me questions wherever you feel it is interesting. You can ask me questions so that you can understand it better rather than a routine presentation. Is there anybody working on biotic stress? May not be working on this particular aspect. Okay. But you can stop me anytime you feel like. Okay. So here again, the different parameters were scored by in vitro RNAi. the short term and in the long term, you can see the roots infected by the worms. These red streaks, they are worms. So we stain the roots and then count the worms that have gone inside. If anybody is working on insects, I'm telling you, it is so very difficult to work on insects. I have been working on Maruca vitrata that infects pigeon bee. It is hugely challenging. We designed the way of injecting double-stranded RNA into the larvae. We tried so many methods. We tried these micro manipulators. Then we normally, for insects, they use Hamilton syringes. So we used Hamilton syringes. Then we got another type of syringes which nobody had used in insects. Wonderful, low cost, 6 rupees. So based on your work, you have to be very ingenious in designing your tools. Otherwise, I'm telling you, if you go by the routine, what is happening in your laboratory, you can never solve your problem and you can't get very novel data. So similarly, one of the students who was working in the lab, we designed that pluronic gel, we picked it up from the literature. Then we got to understand that, oh, this is not very useful. So we made a hybrid gel, using both pluronic and agarose. So as a result, we didn't have to babysit the plates. If we wanted our observations at the end of 24 hours, you just set it up, leave it on the laboratory bench, come back next day morning, and then you can see the worms which have got attracted. Because at the junction of the pluronic gel and agarose, they would go and get stuck. Because the signals will pass through the agarose and get into the pluronic where the worms are placed. So you have to be very, and if you are doing hundreds of bioassays, unless you have such high throughput, easy methods, you can never do. See why there is lack of novelty among our students? Because we never think of any ingenious methods. So if you are aiming at becoming a real scientist, you have to think of these things during your student career. Otherwise, I say, please leave academics. There is no future if you are just aiming at a government job. After some time, you will feel, what am I doing? Useless. There won't be any sense of achievement, which is very important for an individual. Because the way things are happening, the challenges are many in the country. We don't have solutions. Dependency on the companies to give out products is not solution. You are answerable, so you have to be ingenious. So similarly, here also we have done the southern analysis. We have picked up mostly the single copy insertion events and advanced them. qPCR and northern analysis for both dsRNA confirmation and dsRNA confirmation and siRNA confirmation. This is qPCR for transgene expression. The performance of the transgenics in terms of all these disease parameters, you can see in the two events compared to the wild type, how much there is reduction. Here again, we have got around 75–80%. We did this assay. This is a very interesting assay. This morning I was giving another talk in vegetable science for the scientists. Host-delivered RNAi should, in principle, become effective when the worm starts feeding. Common sense. But we found, by way of routine evaluation, that these transgenics, they were preventing the entry of worms even up to 50%. So if you ask a question, why? As an agriculture scientist, a crop scientist, you will ask why it is happening. So we have also been pondering over this for 2 years. Why was it that we are getting reduced infection, particularly in case of transgenics? And it took almost 2 years for us to figure out a way to understand this. So what we did was, we did C14 carbon labeling. And C14 is a very safe isotope, you know that. But it has a half-life of, I think, 5,000 and odd years. Very long, okay, half-life. But it was very useful for us. So after labeling these plants, very young seedlings, just around 5–6 days old seedlings were labeled. And using pluronic gel, we set up infection on these plants with the worms. And when they are just in the process of penetration, because we can monitor everything under a microscope. The gel is transparent. And we got to know that between 6 to 8 hours, majority of the worms which have been inoculated, they are just in the process of making entry. Meaning, they are injecting their secretions. Several times they have to do. See, just one injection is not helping them to make a hole in the plant, in the cell. Okay? So they have to inject several times, during which time they are also withdrawing some plants up. This was not known, not established earlier at all. We all thought that unless they go and start feeding, they are feeding internally, they are non-feeding till then. So then we estimated the C14 content in the worms that were collected just between 6 to 8 hours. All of them were in the process of making entry. So that gave us, then we also did a qPCR for those worms, for the target genes. And both the target genes were downregulated. So that is the way we could prove and understand that here again it depends on the target genes, which we are, functionality of the target genes. So since these genes are very important for infection process, they got repelled. This can also happen, we have done one more thing, many nematodes go initially, but when they find overcrowding, they can also move back, move out. It is like, at their will, they are going inside and coming out. Even that was not known. So using this pluronic gel approach, we could get both these information. Here again, the event characterization was done and event-specific PCR primers were developed. Now, a lot of people might have found it to be what a wasteful exercise. Okay, we filed 2 patents. One, an Indian patent using this FMRFamide like FLP14. Another one, if you have to file any international patents, you have to first file a Indian patent. Though they take sometimes even 8 years or 9 years, but that is a must. First, you have to file an Indian patent, and you cannot patent genes. You know that? It is only process patenting. So we filed a process patent for RNAi-based silencing of FLP14, leading to nematode control. And this was filed in 2015. 2012, we filed the Indian patent. 2015, we filed the, first it was PCT, that is Patent Cooperative Treaty, which covers about 168 countries. So if you get your patent under PCT, then you can, later on, after 1 year, you can decide which jurisdiction, which country to be for final. Because filing so many patents, it involves a lot of cost. So we took up US, and this patent came through in 3.5 years, I should say. Now this March, we got the patent. More importantly, you know how heavily IP protected is RNAi. Okay, whether it is applied to agriculture, veterinary, or life sciences in general, and even biopharma. It is so heavily protected, it is very difficult to get a patent based on RNA gene silencing. So we got a patent, a process patent. More importantly, this is the only patent in the country for the entire life sciences, including agriculture, veterinary, and human medicine. So one should never think that when it is so heavily IP protected, there is no scope for me to go ahead. No, it all depends on how you think. When we started, we had no inkling as to this could lead us to a patent. When we checked, there were no patents, so then we went ahead, and I tell you, it took almost 1.5 years to provide all answers to all the queries, and ultimately they even messed it up. I'm telling you, they didn't examine the answers to the queries raised. As a result, our patent even lapsed. So we had to pay a penalty, though it was not our mistake, it was the mistake on the regulators, but still, by paying the penalty, we revived the patent, but fortunately, that was the last time to be revived, and it went through, okay? So why I'm telling you some of these experiences is, you should never feel demotivated when you come across hurdles in life. And you should keep your eyes open wherever you go, whichever place you go. There will be a small lesson to be learned. I'm telling you this because I'm not a biotechnologist. I'm a conventional, traditional nematologist. Okay? But because of curiosity, I learned everything. Then, coming to the another part of application of RNAi gene silencing to understand the interaction between the nematode and its hypoparasite. Like we use a lot of biocontrol agents. Now if you see these days, so many biocontrol agents have been sequenced. Fungal biocontrol agents. Why do you sequence it? Because you should understand how they are different. I give you one example. Recently we've been working on a particular biocontrol agent. And this biocontrol, we are working on biocontrol agents where we have large number of fungi for the first time isolated, I should say, because we have used a different approach of getting very promising potential biocontrol agents. Okay, so that led us to one of the fungus, I'm not revealing it, which is known to be only an endophyte. And that endophyte gives out a sesquiterpenoid molecule which is very widely used in case of treating lot of neuronal diseases in human beings. Okay? They were isolating it from the plants earlier, but now they have an endophyte which also secretes the same molecule and they are using it. When I saw the genome sequence, there are a few fungi. One of them is Colitotrichum gliosporoides. They wanted to understand what's the pathway of this sesquiterpenoid production by the fungus. It has been different compared to the plant and the fungus. So similarly, if you want to understand the compatibility, like those pathogens which have a very wide host range and versus narrow host range, what makes a particular pathogen to endow with such a large number of weapons which can make it survive on anything, be it different ecological conditions or whatever it is. So genomics is one beautiful example. You probably grow a fungus at different temperatures. You will find, just like how you do abiotic stress tolerance analysis in plants growing, like if it is salt concentration, you grow the plants at different sodium chloride concentrations, and you do, like literature if you go through, it is replete with all these kind of papers. These days, I'm telling you, if you want to apply the knowledge of genomics, if you say that just for curiosity I have done, nobody is going to buy your concept. Without a strong biological question, genomics is useless because you are not doing it. You are just grinding the tissue, giving it to a service provider who is going to sequence and do the annotation. At the most, you may fine tune your annotation. Therefore, nobody is going to buy it without a valid biological question. So what we did was, one of my PhD students, he was working on a very potential bacterial hyperparasite on the worms. There was no information what kind of genes are involved between the nematode and the parasite. Therefore, we took the approach of transcriptome to understand what is happening in the worm at an early stage of parasitization, as early as 8 hours. See, when you mix worms with these bacterial spores, it was earlier thought to be a bacillus, but now it is not a bacillus. It has been given the genus of Pasteurella. Syngenta earns millions of dollars just by mass producing Pasteurella. There one company in US, it's called Pasteurella Bioscience, which was developed by a technician because he was working for a very long time on this bacterium. This is again an obligate parasite, but somehow they say that the medium he has developed has got some 68 ingredients which can help the bacterium to multiply on the medium. As a result, they are multiplying Pasteurella penetrans in fermenters. So they are very widely using for commercial production. Otherwise, it multiplies very happily on the worms. So this is the potential. Now, Syngenta is doing millions of dollars of business. Similarly, the other companies, now you only have 2 or 3 major giants, Everybody is targeting biologicals because transgenics are big question mark in acceptance. So what we did was, we identified the Miladigan incognita genes involved during the interaction with Pasteurella penetrans using transcriptome analysis, then analysis of the miRNA localization site of the selected key genes by in situ hybridization. I wonder how many of you can do in situs. Plants, it's quite difficult. Can anybody raise this if it is going on in your laboratories? It's hugely challenging. So we have done that in worms, and then functional validation again using in vitro RNAi. Okay? So this is how the spores look like. The worms, you can see bead-like spores attached onto the nematode body. This particular piece of work for a PhD thesis gave us 5 papers. One in BMC Genomics, one in Gene, Frontiers in Microbiology, then one in Journal of Nematology, one more paper we have got. And the student got a IRA gold medal. So what we did was, after doing the differential gene expression analysis, 5 transcripts were selected for their predicted role in the nematode Pasteurella interaction. So these are the 5 genes: fructose bisphosphate aldolase, glucosyl transferase, aspartic protease, then ubiquitin and major sperm protein. All were cloned, sequenced for confirmation. Then he did RNAi based mediated silencing and checked its effect on the spore attachment. That's why I said, if you have an in vitro system, nothing like that. I'm telling you, you are the most fortunate. Insects are hugely challenging. In vitro systems are very difficult to rear. Like I told you, we are working on Maruca vitrata. Under North Indian conditions, we get a window of hardly 20 days. It can't be cultured. And we don't get the worms before the season. When it starts showing up under field conditions, we are left with only 25 days. After that, there will be a lot of eggs laid when we rear them under artificial diet, but then they don't hatch. It's just that they dump eggs. So it is so hugely challenging for us to do, even though it is possible to do gene silencing. Same is the case with any other organisms. So silencing of fructose bisphosphatase aldolase and glucosyl resulted in lower endospore attachment. You can see. These are controls. How many spores are on controls compared to the silenced worms? So major findings of this is evidence for early transcriptional response by the nematode after addition of the spores prior to root invasion. Then downregulated gene response was exhibited by the susceptible nematode host, which is probably caused by subversion of host immunity by the parasite. Then addition of Pasteurella endospores to the nematode cuticle induced a downregulated protein response in the nematode, leading to defense suppression and increased longevity of the host. Then several differentially expressed transcripts were putatively involved in nematode innate immunity. See, this is what it is. Otherwise, any host for that matter, it will immediately, trigger the defenses. So all biotic stresses, they have to first target the host immune system. Then stress responses, endospore attachment process, and post-attachment behavioral modification of the juveniles. KIG pathway analysis revealed the presence of signaling and cellular adhesion pathways in the encumbered juveniles. Then RNA-based functional validation of, I'm not going to read, I have already shown. Then the results add new insight into the existing knowledge on early molecular interaction of incognita and Pasteurella penetrans, where the nematode starts responding against the parasite at their initial encounter phase. So this piece of work, there is one guy in Switzerland who works on, there is another species of Pasteurella, it's called Pasteurella ramosa, which goes on to an insect called Daphnia. This Daphnia and Ramosa, model system is used to understand lot of pathways in case of invertebrates. So he wants to now do a comparative genomics between Pasturia ramosa, Pasturia penetrans, and a few other Pasturia species. He got very excited, and then this was this paper also revealed the possibility of getting pure spores of Pasturia. Until then, I tell you, starting from 2005, people have been trying hard to sequence Pasturia. But when they collect the spores or the worms from the plants grown in soil, they are highly contaminated. So you don't know whether the sequences coming are of Pasturia or any other bacteria, because there's no way of differentiating that. But the way we have shown how we have developed the culture indicates that they are very clean spores. And they are also very difficult to break. They are endospores, they are tough. Now the factors affecting endospore adhesion onto the juvenile cuticle surface of M. incognita. We tried 3 different genes. This is the, I think, paper which went into gene. Fatty acid and retinol binding proteins, they are popularly called FAR proteins, selenium binding proteins, and mucin-like proteins. Spore concentration, you can see B is what? dsRNA concentration, and then counting based on 30 individual specimens. These are the worms incubated with silenced worms incubated with the spores, control worms. They are like beads. Even a blind man can say what is the effect. This is in case of increased attachment. MI-FAR increase the attachment. You can see here. Then reduced reproduction potential with respect to galls, egg masses, and eggs per egg mass. No difference in size of the adult females, because some of these genes could also have effect on plant nematode interactions. That's what we have studied, having dual role, you know. Then MI-FAR had a negative impact on host finding ability of the IJs. So you can see at 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12, 14, 16, and this is 48? 18 hours. The number of worms that have gone inside are hugely reduced. Now, major findings here again. Full-length FAR was cloned from incognita and characterized. This was not available in spite of the genomes and transcriptomes. And expression of all developmental stages indicates its importance throughout the nematode life cycle. Expression in the hypodermal region, this is by in situ. It helps them to quickly utilize the fatty acids and retinols from the host tissue. Increased attachment of spores upon knockdown of FAR1 suggests that the protein is involved in the formation of a protective coat on the surface of the cuticle, and then FAR protein has effect on host finding, growth, development, and reproduction. Now, this is another application of RNAi, where we have utilized it for characterizing host recognition and chemotaxis in case of incognita, Miladigan incognita. And this paper, I'm telling you, it came out in Molecular Plant Microbe Interactions. You try getting a paper into MPMI, you will know the problems. It is hugely challenging for a plant protection scientist to get, and it's kind of a dream come true to get a paper in MPMI. The Society, International Society for Molecular Plant Microbe Interaction, it is one of the largest societies for crop protection. And recently they held their, I think once in 2 years, I'm not very sure the frequency, they held their conference in Glasgow. It was attended by more than 1,500 scientists, a very rich society. So here, what we did was, none of these genes were annotated in spite of having the genomes and transcriptomes. So the pathway is well characterized in C. elegans. We took these genes, the pathway, the chemotaxis pathway in C. elegans, and at 30% similarity, we cloned all those 4 genes from root knot nematode and subjected it to functional validation. What is this? in what will happen when we silence this on transcript abundance of on other olfactory. See, you have to establish specific silencing. So that is what we have done, the specific gene silencing. And here there's a lot of interaction, which you can see. I think I'm really running out of time. So you see this was recently published. You can read if you are interested. And what kind of behavioral changes in the movement. You can see this is GFP. This is ODR1 silenced and ODR3 silenced. Here you find lot of random movement because they are searching out for the roots. And then here you find very different kind of tracks. I'm telling you, the functional characterization of each one of these genes in C. elegans is a paper, 1 or 2 papers in journals like Neuron. Neuron is a cell publisher and it carries an impact factor of 16, not your NAS, it is international impact factor. It is that intricate. In C. elegans it's very easy because the entire nervous system has been mapped. Every neuron position is known. So when they want to do functional characterization, what they do is they use laser approach to inactivate the neuron. So loss of function can be studied very easily, but plant parasitic nematodes it's extremely difficult. Therefore, we could not get our paper. We tried getting into PNAs, then we tried into neuron. Ultimately, it could come into MPMI. Okay. These are GFP treated worms. These are silenced. You can see the directional movement as against randomness because they lose the orientation. Then we also did phenotyping in terms of how much time it will take to reach the roots, infection, all that. So it was very interesting to see that it affected the nematode infection ability. Chemotactic response. This is what I said. The student developed this like a combinatorial pluronic in vitro system along with agarose, and he must have set up these bioassays, hundreds of them, because we had to study. In C. elegans, they have done the response towards various organic solvents to implicate the role of these odorant proteins. So for doing that, he had to establish the concentration. If it is very high concentration, it's not going to show anything. Therefore, ultimately he developed, you can see how the worms are stuck at the junction. Here we have agarose and here we have pluronic gel. This is all the data which shows that these genes are important. This is particularly, yes, I should say, this is a molecule called ascaroside. They are like pheromones in insects. They are secreted initially, they were identified initially in Ascaris. That is why the name ascaroside has been given. And they are involved in host finding mechanism, various other functions. So we tried ascaroside 9 and 18. Ascaroside 18 is widely present in the parasitic worms, but 9 is not present. So we took this as a negative control and ascaroside 18 as a positive control, and we did find some interesting results regarding the role of these 4 genes in responding to ascaroside. Again, I'm telling you, ascaroside 18 functional characterization, there are 3 Nature papers. Nature Communication, Nature Biotechnology, there are 2 or 3 Nature papers. Now, last one, midgut genes of Maruca vitrata, because I thought I should say not all worms, how it can be done in insects. This is how we have injected the larvae. Late third star larvae or early third star we can use for dsRNA injection. And what happened to different these midgut genes? None of these genes are known in the literature. They are all novel genes, and we had quite a bit of mortality here. Then this is the I think the status of transgenics. So now we have T2, T3 generation transgenics, gene 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, number of events generated, what molecular characterization we have done. You know how difficult it is to transform pigeon pea? One of the worst crops to grow as well as transform. The highly recalcitrant crop. Then different dsRNA delivery approaches that are available. Then summary in insects, you can read this. Now, what are the challenges for host-delivered RNAi effects? Robust expression of dsRNA in the plant, then meaning unless and until you get the entire tDNA, including your sense and antisense along with the intron, you are not going to get dsRNA expression, because when the transcription takes place, it folds and then it gets spliced off. Therefore, it is extremely important, because people have done after 1 or 2 generations, the construct has fallen apart. Then expressed dsRNA should not have any homology with any of the host genes. This is to avoid non-target and unintended effects. For this, companies are reducing the size of the saRNAs to just 13 base pairs. They don't reveal all sorts of, particularly there are several people who are trying for external application, dsRNA as a pesticide. So for that it is very important, forget about transgenics, but as a pesticide. So there is a company, I think in Korea, they synthesize a kilogram of double-stranded RNA for any target gene, and they charge 45 lakhs. So it's a big business. This is what people should explore. It is very simple. I have shown, we have initially used is in vitro based system using the kit, transcription kit. But the other way for large scale production is you can use a bacterial system. It's a modified system, and you can produce that in fermenters. The other aspect required is stabilization of dsRNA, which can be, there are many papers now which shows dsRNA can be stabilized. So people are making nano formulations of that. They are using it for external application. One of the papers which came out recently, published by Nina's group in Australia, she was IRA alumni, that came out in Nature Communications. Okay, so I mean there are umpteen opportunities for taking it ahead, and then challenge is whether we can silence more than one functional gene. Yes, there is a possibility you can make fusion constructs. We have prepared fusion constructs targeting something like 9 genes, 4 genes, different functional genes. Okay, then route specific, depending on the target tissue where the pathogen is feeding, you can go for route specific expression, just like any other transgenic approach, Then expression level of dsRNA required for effective RNAi is still questionable. Inability to generate mutants, particularly in case of nematodes, this is a problem, but insects you can develop the mutants, no problem. And lack of information on genetic control of different functions. That becomes very easy. If this particular function is controlled by say 4 genes, even if it is a multi-genic trait, doesn't matter. You can target. But then where there is no information on the genetic control of a particular function, that becomes hugely challenging. Okay? That's it. Any questions? I hope at least you could understand some part. You all must be hungry also. Okay, thank you.